Good morning, good morning. Welcome to Stepping Up Kosher for today. I think we're in installment number 19 or number 20. Today we are continuing our ongoing journey. The longest part of kosher is basar v'chalav, which is the laws of milk and meat. And today we are finally going to get, I feel like for the past few weeks the milk and meat have been getting closer and closer together. We've done like, can they be next to each other in the fridge? Can you cook them together? And now we're going to talk about what if they actually touch each other. Good morning, good morning. Make yourself a plate, have some breakfast. What if, thank you Anna for breakfast. What if the milk and meat actually touch each other, right? Does that mean that I now need to throw out the milk and meat? Obviously it's going to depend on the temperature. It's going to depend on the quantity and things like that, right? So we're going to start off from the lightest and we'll get more and more stringent as we move along. We'll start off with the things that are the easiest and then we'll get to more and more complicated as we move along. Sometimes you have to rinse off whatever it is. Sometimes it's helpless. You can't do anything about it. Sometimes you need to shave off a piece, literally, off of, let's say, a piece of meat or whatever it is, in order to be able to continue to eat from it. Let's see if she'll go to sleep. If she doesn't go to sleep, then she'll join us for the class. She's going to sleep, Martin. Let's do it. There we go. All right, so that's the topic for today. So let's start with the easiest. If you have a cold piece of meat, and it could be cooked, that's fine, but cold. Doesn't have to be raw. A cold piece of meat and a cold piece of cheese, and they touched each other. And let's give some conditions, okay? And the same thing with any fleischig dish or milchig dish, if it's made with meat or made with dairy, and they touched each other. And let's give some conditions. Both of them were completely dry, all right? And they touch each other. And then you look, and you see there's no cheese on the meat and there's no meat on the cheese. In such a situation, to begin with, you should rinse off the point of contact. But even if you didn't, they are both mutter. They are both allowed to be eaten. You can go ahead and eat them both. Again, provided that all of those conditions are met. They're both dry. They touched each other, but nothing went from one to the other. You take a look and you can see with your eye, nothing tracked from one to the other. And to begin with, you should wipe it down, and then it's fine. But even if you didn't wipe it down, you're good to go. Okay, now what if one of them is a little bit wet, right? So if one of them is wet, then you are required to rinse, not just wipe, but to rinse off the point of contact. And then again, they're both allowed, on both of them obviously, right? On the cheese and on the milk, on the cheese and on the meat, and then they are both allowed to be eaten. Okay, what's about grease, right? We're stepping things up here. What about greasy meat, which touched, for example, perhaps dry cheese, or greasy meat that touched greasy cheese, or dry meat that touched greasy cheese? In other words, there's some sort of grease involved here, which we already discussed, that grease has a tendency to travel everywhere, right? That's a halachic terminology, by the way. Shemen mefafeh b'chol davar. Grease has a tendency to travel and touch everything, goes from one thing to another thing. If you've ever had oily hands, you know that. There's no stopping oil from getting everywhere, right? So if you have, okay, looks like Leah is just joining us, okay? People on Facebook are always very excited when they're doing this. You know, Rabbi Penson calls his Shabbos morning class the best kept secret of Chabad, right? So I call this is the cutest class of Chabad. You want a sassy? Or are you just going to sit? No. Okay. So if you have a greasy piece of meat that touched cold cheese, again, this is all cold so far, right? A greasy piece of meat that touches cheese, or maybe a piece of butter, which by definition is greasy, or yellow cheese, which is greasy, which touches meat, and the meat could be dry. In this instance, you need to properly scrub down the point of contact in such a way that you are 100% sure that there is nothing left of any of the opposing category. And after that, you have to, so you scrub it down, then you rinse it off, either with cold water or lukewarm water, and then they are both allowed to be eaten. Now, if you made a mistake, all right, and you only, let's say, dried it off, right? You wiped it down without rinsing it off. And let's say it was even cooked that way. After the fact, again, you're not allowed to do this to begin with, but after the fact that is actually allowed to be eaten. Anybody want to guess why? You've cooked a piece of meat that was touched by greasy cheese, so we could pretty much assume that there's grease from the cheese on the meat, and then you've cooked it, again, not knowingly, right? Maybe for example, you didn't know that it touched the other thing, right? And now it's after the fact, the rabbi tells you you're allowed to eat it. Why? Anybody want to guess? When it comes to the cooking, actually makes it worse. The thing that works in your favor is the amount, because the grease is going to be way less than 1 to 60, so therefore it's going to be allowed. All right, are we ready to keep moving? Step it up even more.
Does that trife what you're cooking it in?
No.
Okay.
No. Again, same thing, because it's such a minuscule amount. Yes. Again, after the fact, you should not be cooking this to begin with. In fact, it's usur. It's prohibited to go and cook that, because that would mean you're actively cooking milk and meat together. There is no minimum amount that is allowed to go and cook milk and meat together. And this is a common mistake that people make. This whole rule of 1 in 60 doesn't mean that I can go now, I want my meat to have just a slight milk flavor, so I'll put in a drop of milk, which is 1 to 60, and I'm good to go. That's not how the 1 to 60 rule works. The 1 to 60 rule is after the fact. Do we say that it's batal? Right? Do we say that it's nullified to the other taste? Right? And 1 to 60 it is. But to begin with, to go and do that, you're not allowed to. In fact, it's prohibited because, remember, 4 or 5 weeks ago when we started the whole category of milk and meat, we said that the origin of milk and meat is that verse, right? Do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. And that's repeated multiple times in the Torah. And the reason it's repeated multiple times in the Torah is to tell you about all the different prohibitions. You're not allowed to eat it together, you're not allowed to cook it together, etc., right? So you're not allowed to actively go and cook milk and meat together. Even if it's a minuscule amount that after the fact would be allowed to be eaten. Right? Okay. All right. On that note, by the way, so this is all good because we're getting our feet wet for all the different, more complicated things that are coming up. For example, what's if you're not talking about cheese? What if you're talking about milk? Right? So let's start off again. Let's start off slow, and then we'll get to more complicated. Let's say in the fridge you have a bottle of milk, and let's say you're non-Jewish cleaning help. Because no Jew would ever take their milk and put it into the fridge on its side. That's too. We're too OC. We're too worried. You put the milk on its side, maybe a drop is going to drip down to the shelf underneath, and the shelves in the fridge are very often graded, right? So it goes through, and there might be a piece of meat underneath. So you never put your milk on its side. Okay, but let's say you're non-Jewish cleaning help, put the milk on its side. They put the milk back in the fridge, and the milk is now on its side, and there's a little bit dripping down, and there is a piece of meat sitting open in the fridge. Again, all bad. This is all bad practice, and we discussed this a few weeks ago. That in the fridge things should be wrapped, and maybe even double wrapped, and there should be separate shelves, and there should be separate places. And I definitely shouldn't leave a dairy dish that has liquid in it that could drip down, etc. You have to be careful about these kind of things. But let's say it didn't happen. That's why I'm giving the example of a non-Jewish cleaning help that did this, right? So you have a piece of meat and it's open. On the top of it is milk. And the milk is on its side, and the milk is dripping down onto it. And a little bit goes down, and the meat is cold. Very important. The meat is cold. And some actual milk dripped down. You open the fridge, you see 3-4 drops. Not a lot, it's not soaking, right? We're going to get the soaking in a second. Mm-hmm. But it's a couple of drops of milk that went down. So he says, Yadiach hetiv, he has to wipe it down properly, the meat, and then he can eat the meat cold. But he adds in a detail here. It's not just that you're allowed to eat the meat cold. You're actually prohibited from warming up that meat. We know that there's a tiny drop of milk inside that meat. Even though you wiped it down, some of it must have seeped in. There's a really good chance. So for you to eat it, we say that the taste is nullified because it's 1 to 60. But for you to go and actively cook this, you're not allowed to because you know that there's milk and meat together and you're actively cooking milk and meat. Right? So you're not allowed to go and cook it because of the prohibition of cooking milk and meat. So to put on our Rabbi Pinson caps for a moment, let's make a riddle. Let's say somebody asked you, what's a case in which you're allowed to eat a certain dish, according to halacha, but you're not allowed to cook it? This is a case like that. You're allowed to eat this situation because we're saying that it's already after the fact. The meat you weren't allowed to drip the milk into it consciously. But if the milk is in there already, and you did your best to get rid of any milk that's on there, and you still know there's a tiny drop in there, it's nullified 1 to 60. So you're allowed to eat it, but you're not allowed to cook it because you know there's a drop of milk in there. So cooking it means you're actively cooking milk and meat. So this is an interesting situation, but you have a food product, a dish of some sort that you're allowed to eat it according to halacha, according to all opinions. But you'd be prohibited from cooking it. Interesting situation. Okay, what about if it wasn't a few drops? What if, I'm not even going to put this in your fridge because this is a terrible situation. Okay, what if a piece of meat fell somehow into a pot of milk? Not a pot, a pot is hot. Not a pot. Into a bucket of milk. You just finished milking your cow, because I can't think of any other reason why you would have a bucket of milk in your house. You just finished milking your cow, you got a whole bunch of milk sitting in a bucket, and a piece of meat falls off the counter. It's cooked already, but it's cold. Falls into the bucket of milk. Now it's soaking in the milk. Right? Now we got a real problem. So he says, first of all, you have to rinse it off properly in water. And then dry it off. And then you're allowed to eat it. Okay? The piece of meat. But, and again, this is all because we're relying. There's nothing that you can actively see. And anything that's inside of it is 1 in 60. Okay. But the milk, okay, the milk that a piece of meat fell into has a problem. There's no way to rinse off milk. There's certainly no way to dry off milk. And we know that there's some meat grease or some meat flavor, whatever it is that went into it. Right? So he says, now you would think that would work against you, but because of the 1 in 60 rule, it actually works in your favor. Turns out, there's nothing you can do to the milk, so you don't have to do anything, and then you're allowed to drink the milk. Without any rinsing, without anything. But let's add in the same caveat that we added before, which is what?
You can't do it on purpose.
Obviously you can't do it on purpose, correct? And what's the other one? Very good. You cannot cook it. So you don't know that they're part of the class. They're listening. You're not allowed to actively go and cook that milk. Because then you would be warming up milk and meat together. Right? You'd be boiling milk and meat together, which is a prohibition. Okay. Now, I want to add one little quick caveat here. Not caveat, quick. I'm going to qualify what I just said. We're talking about the meat fell in, was there maybe for 5 minutes, you didn't notice it over it, you pulled it out. Right? Some of the experts in the class, maybe somebody on Facebook, maybe somebody here, remembers that a few weeks ago we spoke about a rule called kavush kimuvushal dami, which means that when something is pickled, and according to Jewish law, pickled means that it's over 24 hours in liquid, it's considered like it's cooked. Pickling is like cooking. It's a form of cooking. It is, by the way, right? We know that when you take cucumbers and you put them in water and vinegar and salt and whatever, right, for a long time, eventually it changes into a different, we call it a pickle. There's pickles there, right? They've been sitting in a liquid for a long time. So similarly, if a piece of meat sits inside water for over 24 hours, it's considered pickling, and therefore it's considered cooked. If you recall, one of the situations that I told you that we need to be careful about this in our practical day-to-day lives is when you have dishes in the sink. If you have dishes in the sink and they're going to sit for longer than 24 hours, right? In general, we have to be careful to have separate sinks, right? But let's say you're careful to have separate sinks, but maybe a little bit of meat splashed into the milk sink. Not that big a deal. If you wash the dishes right away, everything's going to be washed off. It's all going to be good, right? But if it's going to sit for over 24 hours, that's a big problem, right? I think I even had such a situation. I believe I did. I had such a situation once in which a fork was placed in the wrong sink. A mistake, maybe by one of my kids, maybe even by me, right? Dumped the fork into the wrong sink. There was a salad bowl sitting there that we had made a nice cheesy salad in. I don't remember, it's maybe like a Greek salad or something that had cheese in it. And it was sitting. And naturally what happens when things are sitting, especially a big salad bowl, water goes in, somebody's washing their hands, water goes over, it goes into the bowl, and the bowl had filled up with half a thing of water. And there was a meat fork that had been thrown into the wrong sink, landed inside that bowl, boom. They were both great. Why? Because they were considered cooked together. Right? Anyways, this is all just to remind you about the rule of kavush kimavushal, which means that pickling is like cooking. Okay? So now to our situation, you had a piece of meat that fell into a bucket of milk, right? What happens if that meat then sat in that bucket of milk for over 24 hours? Right? In this case, you're talking about basically, you have to equivocate this with sitting on the fire for an hour. Right? Because it's like it was cooked. So you have a piece of meat that's been sitting inside milk, or it could be the opposite as well. It could be a piece of cheese that fell into, or whatever, I don't know, something milchig, something that's dairy, fell into a bucket of gravy or whatever, or into a cholent, or into a chicken soup, or whatever it is, and it sat there cold, everything cold, for 24 hours. In this case, they are completely treif, to use the modern term that we use, treif, completely prohibited to eat this dish. Okay. So now he wants to get into some technical details, because this is the way Jews are, right? What's if? And by the way, every rabbi who answers questions will tell you that these what's ifs happen all the time. So he says, what's if the 24 hours wasn't consistent? Right? For example, during those 24 hours, you changed the water. Let's say it was water, there was a piece of meat and a piece of cheese inside there, right? We're saying that if it was over 24 hours, that would be prohibited. But in between, I don't know, the water was empty and refilled. I can't think of like a practical situation in which this would have happened and happened by mistake, right? Here you go. Do you want it? Do you want to say good morning to Anchi? To Yitzchak? Say good morning, Yitzchak Alvarez. Missed you last night. Yitzchak, we would have loved to see you last night. We had a beautiful social here, a dinner and a show. Hopefully sometime soon for something else. Are you guys coming today for the parade? Hopefully. I'm just talking to the people on Facebook. Pardon me. I have to apologize to the people in person. They're like, who are you talking to? Anyways, so I can't think of a practical instance which this happens. Let's say there was some sort of liquid, and the liquid was changed. And somehow still the milk and meat ended up in the same thing. So you had 24 hours. The 24 hours wasn't consecutive. 10 hours, and then maybe 10 hours it was outside, and another 10 hours, right? So in such a situation, technically it's not considered pickling. And since they weren't pickled together, you can rinse them off and you can eat them. Very interesting. 10 hours it's been sitting together, right? Milk and meat together in a bucket inside some form of liquid. And then it comes out, and then it goes another 10 hours, and then another. Right? Again, I can't think of a case in which this happened. But let's say it happened. Since it wasn't consecutive 24 hours, right, 24 hours straight in a row, it's considered that it was never pickled, therefore never cooked, and therefore it's basically the same thing like falling into a bucket of milk, which we said you can go and rinse it off properly, wipe it off properly, and then you're allowed to eat it because whatever's left is nullified 1 in 60. Yes, your question? Oh, just listening. Okay, I thought you said something. Okay, good. All right. But again, as usual, we're going to take it up a notch. So let's qualify what we said earlier. So far, what we've been talking about, it was a piece of meat inside milk. It was a piece of milk inside, let's say, chicken soup, right? Or it was, I don't know, whatever, both of them inside water. Or inside, I don't know, something very simple. But what if the liquid that it was soaking in, like an actual pickling process, was sharp? Which is very often the instance, right? Pickling. If this is an active pickling plant, then there's probably not just water in there. It's probably vinegar or something like that, right? So he says, milk and meat that sat together for over 24 hours, not just in water, not just in liquid, but in something sharp. For example, vinegar. And maybe it wasn't even 24 hours, he says. Maybe it was less than 24 hours. It becomes prohibited. Okay, so how long? Is there a minimum amount? The answer is yes. 18 minutes. If it was longer than 18 minutes inside a sharp liquid, so sharp liquid could be that there were onions inside the water. Sharp liquid could be that there was vinegar inside, the lemon juice inside, something acidic that's actually actively pickling them. In such a situation, it's prohibited even if it was there over 18 minutes, way less than 24 hours. Why? Because in a sharp liquid, the pickling process happens quicker. It happens after 18 minutes. After 18 minutes, it's basically like pickling over 24 hours in a non-sharp liquid. And if so, then it's basically like being cooked. And in that instance, it's prohibited. Okay, if it was less than 18 minutes, so then you go back to the other rule, right? Rinse it off properly, or with cold water, or with lukewarm water, whatever it is. And then he says, he adds an extra layer. It's because it was something sharp. He says you should peel off the outer layer of whatever it is that you're eating. So let's say it's a piece of cheese. Take a knife, slice the edge of the cheese on all 6 sides, and then you're good to go.
Like an onion.
And again, always, you're not allowed to cook them. You can't take that piece of cheese, which fell, let's say, into this sharp meat dish, and it was less than 18 minutes. Now you're going to rinse it off properly, and you're going to cut off the edges. But you cannot take that piece of cheese and go and cook it. Why? Because then you will actively be cooking milk and meat together. Yes.
What in school?
What did you learn in school?
Never asked a what if question.
I taught you that yesterday, no?
No, I learned it in school.
I just said it to you yesterday. No what if questions.
No.
This is somebody else, then maybe it's somebody else. What if? Yeah. Okay. All right, let's keep going. What if something was hot? Okay? I'm trying to figure out if we're going to finish this today, and I should skip a few and finish it today, or if we should continue next week. Let's see what the time is. Okay, we're going to finish next week. So let's not go to hot yet. Let's just talk about when two things touch each other, but one of them is pickled. Okay? So let's start off with both of them were pickled. Let's say you had a piece of meat and a piece of cheese that touch each other. The piece of cheese had been pickled in a nice kosher way on its own. The piece of meat had been pickled in a nice kosher way on its own. Right? By the way, in case you're thinking this is such an impractical place, you eat all the time meat that is pickled. You buy it pre-pickled. Like a good pastrami or something. Often it's a pickled pastrami. Right? I can't think of cheese. Do they sell pickled cheese sometimes?
Pepper jack cheese.
It's pickled. Yeah. It's often.
It's sharp.
it's sharp, and often it's been soaked in a liquid before, right? When they're making it, the process they're making it. Anyways, so let's say the two of them touched each other. Again, they both been pickled in a nice kosher way, and then they touched each other in a way that a proper amount of the pickling, right? So in other words, let's say there's a lot of salt, which is often how they pickle it, right? There's a lot of salt on the edge of the meat. And some of that transferred over.
The cheese.
Yeah, transferred over to the cheese. So in other words, they're both very, very salty. They have a very salty, very pickled taste. And they're oozing, because he calls it sweating. I'm still trying to figure out how to translate it. They're oozing because of the pickling process. Now, therefore, this pickling process is active already. Think of like yeast, right? You can tell when it's active, when it's not active. So same thing on cheese or on meat. It can be active. The pickling process is making that they're oozing out into each other, and then they touch each other. And therefore, the taste is transferring from one. It's in active transfer mode. You don't need any time. You don't need 24 hours. You don't need 18 minutes, right? So he says now you need to see how much of the taste went to the other. He says the taste is actively transferred. You can consider this as if it's actively moving from one to the other. So what you need to see now is to see how much transferred and how much will be the amount in order to try and apply the 1 in 60 rule, right? So let's say, and he says you're not trying to measure 1 in 60 to the amount of. I don't know if you could even somehow figure this out, but the amount of oozing that's of flavor from one to the other. What you're looking for is the actual size of the piece of meat, the full piece of meat, and the full piece of milk, of dairy product, right? So if the piece of meat is tiny and the piece of cheese is very big, or vice versa, in such a way that the entire piece would be nullified 1 in 60 into the other one. So he says then all you need to do is shave off an amount. And the minimum amount you could shave is fine. Kedei klipa, it's called. Enough that there's an actual piece that was shaved off from the larger one. Then you can eat it. Why? Because of the rule of 1 in 60. Obviously, if none of them have 1 in 60, so for example, let's say it's 2 equally sized pieces, then it's completely prohibited. Okay, what if they weren't oozing? What if they were completely dry, right? And maybe even they were wet, but it wasn't oozing and bubbling from the pickling, right? It's just a little bit damp. So in such a situation, he says it's enough to rinse it off with cold water, and it looks like you don't even need to shave off a piece. Why? Because he says the dampness that's going to touch from one to the other is not enough pickling to actually cook it into the other piece. You can just rinse it off, and it's good to go. Just like when damp milk and damp meat. Right, a damp milk product and a damp meat product, which both touch each other, and there was no pickling involved whatsoever. Just like in that situation was fine, in this situation is fine as well.
Yes. With this, like pickling wise, it's usually like a stronger thing.
Yeah, that's exactly the issue. The issue is it's a stronger taste. It's a sharp taste.
It's called water and stronger like liquids like oil, vinegar, and all that stuff. They don't merge at all, so it's gonna.
Oh, interesting.
They're not gonna touch each other. The water is just gonna touch water.
I never heard that. Okay. I never heard that that's a reason halachically to make it.
Not halachically, just.
Oh, you're just saying science, right? Okay. But we have to understand halachically whether that makes it allowed or not. That's the point. That's the point of this class. Okay. Let's keep going. What if one of them is pickled, but one of them is not pickled, right? So you have a piece of meat and a piece of cheese touch each other. One of them is pickled, one of them is not pickled. Each piece has to have, even the pickled one, right? Which you would think it's not going to take in flavor from the other one. The other one is not pickled, right? The thing is, though, it is pickling. It itself is pickling. Let's say the piece of meat is pickling and the piece of cheese is not. It's a dry, regular piece of cheese, right? And they touch each other. Even the piece of pickled meat, if it takes taste from the cheese, it's then going to pickle it on its own, which is like we said, pickling is like cooking, right? So in these situations, both of them, each one needs to have 1 in 60 to the other in order to allow it. So the piece of cheese would have to be tiny, piece of meat very large in order to allow it to be used. And even in such a situation, you would need to shave off the outer layer and wash it down properly. Okay. Why are we talking about all these things? Right? We said that all these things are things that, anyways, right? There's so many bad practices that have been There's so many safeties that you've passed here, right? They shouldn't be next to each other. They shouldn't be in the fridge together. They shouldn't be pickling next to each other. All these different things. So the reason is because of a rule in halacha which is called hefsid meruba. Hefsid meruba means, what's if we're not talking about your little kitchen and one little piece of meat, where you tell the rabbi, you know what? If it's even like, can you even see yourself ever using this rule? Are you kidding me? Pickled meat and pickled cheese, they touched each other, and now I'm going to start going and shaving off a piece and eating it. I don't want to even come close to eating milk and meat together, right? So let's exaggerate the case. Let's say it's not your kitchen. Let's say this is a case that's being posed to Rabbi Hanoka's brother, Rabbi Yitzchak Hanoka, who works to the OK. And actually it's from one of his mashgichim, it's from one of his supervisors on one of the plants. And he's talking about quantities of a company that's going to cause them a tremendous loss. It's going to ruin the whole batch for this. And these things can sometimes be the loophole which can make the whole batch allowed. And can make the whole batch allowed to begin with. A lot of times these rules, we say that they're applied, but don't go and apply them in your kitchen. But in a case where somebody's going to be losing a lot of money, then it becomes an exaggerated instance, and then we would say it's totally allowed. And you can use these allowances that we discussed today in order to allow them. So I guess basically what I'm trying to say is everything we discussed today, bad practice to even use that rule. Ideally, you shouldn't even get close to these situations happening. If you got into a situation where it did happen, right? You shouldn't be using these loopholes and these allowances in your own kitchen. You shouldn't be rinsing off a piece of meat that fell into a bucket of milk in order to eat it in your own house. Throw it out. All right, you lose $20, it's fine. Right? But in a case where it's a full factory, which it's a big mass and have some rupa, in such a situation, we would go ahead and use them. And with this, we'll conclude our Stepping Up Kosher for today. Looking forward to seeing you all next week, hopefully with a larger crowd, because everybody will be back from vacation, for Stepping Up Kosher every Sunday at 10 o'clock a.m. Thank you all for joining us.